if the greatest source of your suffering is not what life has taken from you, but what your mind keeps trying to hold on to. Tonight, before you ask life to become easier, before you ask the world to finally slow down, allow yourself to consider a different possibility. Perhaps peace has never been hiding somewhere in the future. Perhaps it has been quietly waiting behind one simple truth that you have overlooked countless times. If your heart has felt unusually heavy lately, if your thoughts continue circling the same memories long after everyone else has moved on, if sleep arrives only after hours of replaying conversations that cannot be changed, then know that you are not alone. So many people lie awake beneath the same quiet darkness, carrying invisible burdens that no one else can see. Their bodies are exhausted, but their minds refuse to rest. They are not fighting monsters or impossible challenges. They are simply fighting the natural movement of life itself. Tonight, you do not need to solve your entire life. You do not need to fix every relationship, answer every unanswered question, or predict what tomorrow will bring. For these next few moments, all you are asked to do is breathe a little more slowly. Allow your shoulders to soften and let your attention settle gently into the present moment. Feel the surface beneath you supporting your body without asking anything in return. Notice the quiet rhythm of your breathing. There is nowhere else you need to be. There is nothing you must accomplish before peace is allowed to visit you. Long ago, the Buddha pointed toward a truth so simple that many people overlook it while searching for more complicated answers. This truth has survived kingdoms, generations, and countless changing civilizations because it speaks directly to the human heart. Yet it is not hidden inside a distant monastery. It is not reserved for monks living in mountain temples. It is quietly unfolding around you every second of your life. Every breath arrives and leaves. Every sound appears and disappears. Every season changes without asking permission. Every sunrise eventually becomes evening. Every joyful moment passes, and every painful moment does the same. This quiet law has never stopped working, even for a single instant. We call it impermanence. Many people hear that word and immediately feel uncomfortable. They imagine loss. They imagine saying goodbye. They imagine uncertainty. They believe impermanence is a harsh reminder that nothing lasts forever. But what if that is only half of the story? What if impermanence is not a threat, but the very reason healing is possible? Imagine for a moment that nothing could ever change. Every disappointment would remain forever. Every anxious thought would become permanent. Every painful memory would stay exactly as vivid as it was on the day it happened. Every lonely night would stretch endlessly into every tomorrow. Suddenly, the truth that everything changes begins to feel less frightening and far more compassionate. The same law that allows beautiful moments to fade is also the law that allows suffering to soften. The same current that carries away the blossoms of spring also carries away the storms that once seemed impossible to survive. Yet our minds often behave as though they have never learned this lesson. We cling tightly to yesterday because it feels familiar. We rehearse old conversations, hoping the ending might somehow change. We resist uncertainty because certainty feels safe, even when it quietly steals our peace. We become attached to identities that no longer fit who we are becoming. We hold onto versions of ourselves that existed years ago, wondering why life feels so heavy. Perhaps you have noticed this within yourself. Maybe there is someone whose words still echo in your thoughts. Maybe there is a mistake you replay again and again, wishing you could rewrite a single moment. Maybe there is a dream that did not unfold as you expected, leaving you wondering what your life might have been. None of these experiences make you weak. They make you wonderfully human. The Buddha never taught that pain itself could always be avoided. Instead, he gently showed that much of our suffering comes from believing life should remain exactly as we want it to be. We suffer because we ask changing things to stay unchanged. We ask flowing rivers to become still. We ask passing clouds to remain fixed in one place. We ask time to pause whenever happiness arrives, and to speed forward whenever sadness appears. But life has never agreed to those conditions. It continues moving with quiet patience, inviting us to move with it instead of against it. There is a gentle image often found in nature. Picture a single autumn leaf resting on the surface of a calm stream. It does not struggle against the water. It does not demand that the current stop moving. It simply allows itself to be carried wherever the stream naturally flows. Meanwhile, imagine placing a stone into that same current. The water must push around it endlessly. Turbulence forms. Resistance appears. The stream itself remains unchanged, but the experience becomes entirely different depending on whether something chooses to flow or insists on remaining fixed. Sometimes our minds become that stone. We grip tightly to expectations, identities, fears, and old stories until every passing day feels like a battle. The remarkable thing is that life is rarely fighting us. More often, we are quietly fighting life. This realization is not meant to bring guilt. It is meant to bring relief. Because if our suffering is created by resistance, then peace does not require changing the entire world. It begins by loosening our grip, just enough to let one breath come and go without chasing it, just enough to let one thought appear without believing it defines us, just enough to let one difficult emotion exist without demanding that it disappear immediately. Tonight, as the world outside grows quieter, you are invited to experiment with something beautifully simple. Instead of asking, "How do I make everything stay the way I want it?" perhaps ask, what happens if I allow this moment to be exactly as it is? There is extraordinary freedom hidden inside that question. It does not erase your responsibilities. It does not deny your dreams. It simply reminds you that peace begins long before circumstances become perfect. Peace begins the moment you stop asking reality to become something other than what it already is. And this is only the beginning of a much deeper journey, because the ancient secret of impermanence reveals not only why we suffer, but also why lasting inner peace has been quietly available to us all along. Imagine sitting beside a quiet river just before sunrise. The air is cool, the surface of the water is perfectly still, and for a brief moment, everything seems untouched by time. Then, without effort, a single ripple appears. A gentle breeze moves across the water. Tiny circles spread outward before disappearing completely. The river does not resist the wind, nor does it attempt to preserve the perfect reflection that existed only a moment before. It simply continues being a river. There's a quiet wisdom hidden inside this ordinary scene, one that the human mind often forgets. We spend so much of our lives hoping to freeze beautiful moments exactly as they are. We want youth to remain youthful. We want love to remain exactly as it felt on its happiest day. We want success to stay without challenge. We want our health to remain untouched by time. We want certainty in a world that has never promised it. Then, when change inevitably arrives, we feel surprised, disappointed, or even betrayed, as though life has somehow broken an agreement it never actually made. The Buddha invited people to look much more carefully at this experience. He did not ask them to reject beauty or stop loving the people around them. He did not encourage cold detachment or emotional distance. Instead, he asked a remarkably gentle question. What happens when we love something while also understanding that it is constantly changing? At first, this may seem like a sad thought. Yet, with deeper reflection, it becomes one of the most compassionate perspectives a person can embrace. When you understand that every conversation is unique, you listen more carefully. When you realize every sunset happens only once, you pause long enough to truly see it. When you recognize that the people you love are also traveling through changing seasons of their own lives, your heart naturally becomes softer, more patient, and more grateful. Impermanence does not reduce the value of life. It gives life its value. Think about your favorite season of the year. Perhaps it is autumn with its colorful leaves, or spring with fresh blossoms, or summer evenings filled with warm light, or quiet winter mornings. Part of what makes that season so meaningful is that it does not last forever. If spring never ended, eventually you would stop noticing the blossoms. If every day looked exactly the same, wonder would slowly disappear. Change keeps life alive. The mind, however, often confuses familiarity with safety. It builds invisible routines, not only in our daily habits, but also in our emotional lives. We become accustomed to worrying in certain ways. We rehearse familiar fears because they seem predictable. We return to old disappointments because they have become strangely comfortable companions. Even painful thoughts can begin to feel like home simply because they have visited us for so long. This is why letting go can feel frightening. We imagine we are losing a part of ourselves, when in reality, we may only be releasing a pattern that has quietly borrowed our attention for years. Consider how often your thoughts travel backward into memories or forward into imagined futures. Rarely do they remain exactly where your body already is. Your hands may be resting peacefully. Your breathing may be steady. The room around you may be completely safe. Yet your mind creates storms by replaying moments that no longer exist or anticipating moments that have not yet arrived. None of this happens because there is something wrong with you. It happens because the human mind naturally searches for permanence inside an impermanent world. The Buddha observed this tendency with extraordinary compassion. Rather than criticizing the mind, he simply encouraged people to notice what it was doing. Notice how every thought appears, lingers briefly, and fades. Notice how every emotion rises, changes, and eventually softens. Even the strongest feelings are not fixed objects. They behave more like weather moving across an open sky. Some clouds stay longer than others, but none remain forever. This simple observation changes everything because it gently separates who you are from what you experience. You are not your passing fear. You are not your temporary sadness. You are not your anxious thoughts. These experiences visit your awareness, but they are not the awareness itself. Imagine standing beside a highway watching cars pass by. Some are small. Some are large. Some move quickly while others slow down. You do not chase each vehicle, and you do not believe every car belongs to you. Thoughts can be observed in much the same way. Some arrive carrying joy. Others carry regret or uncertainty. The more we believe every passing thought deserves our complete attention, the more exhausted we become. But when we simply observe their movement, something unexpected begins to happen. The mind gradually loses its urgency. The endless need to control every experience begins to soften. There is no force involved in this practice. There is no battle to win. You are simply allowing reality to unfold as it has always unfolded. Right now, while you are listening, countless changes are already taking place without asking for your permission. Your breathing continues. Your heartbeat quietly serves you. The night slowly moves toward morning. Cells within your body are renewing themselves. Sounds appear and disappear. Even this sentence exists for only a brief instant before becoming part of your memory. Life has always been flowing with remarkable kindness, patiently inviting you to trust its movement instead of resisting every current. Perhaps this is why genuine inner peace feels so different from temporary comfort. Comfort depends on circumstances remaining pleasant. Peace grows from understanding that whatever arrives will also continue changing. Joy comes and goes. Difficulty comes and goes. Success comes and goes. Uncertainty comes and goes. The one thing that quietly remains available through every changing season is your ability to meet each moment with gentle awareness instead of fearful resistance. Tonight, there is nothing you need to force. There is no perfect emotional state you must achieve before resting. Simply notice the rhythm of your breath. Notice the quiet space between one thought and the next. Notice that even your effort to understand these words will soon pass, making room for the next experience. Little by little, without struggle, you may begin to recognize that peace has never depended on stopping change. It has always depended on learning to move with it, just as the river continues flowing without fear of where the current leads. Inevitably, there comes a moment when almost everyone quietly asks the same question. If everything changes, how can anything truly matter? At first, this seems like a reasonable concern. Many people hear the teaching of constant change and mistakenly believe it encourages indifference. They imagine that if nothing lasts, then there is no reason to care deeply, to love sincerely, or to pursue meaningful dreams. Yet this misunderstanding creates a distance between ourselves and one of the most liberating insights ever offered. The wisdom of impermanence has never asked us to stop loving. It simply asks us to love without trying to possess. There is an enormous difference between appreciation and ownership. Appreciation allows beauty to exist exactly as it is. Ownership quietly demands that beauty remain exactly as we prefer. Consider a bird singing outside your window on an early morning. For a few precious moments, its song fills the air with quiet joy. Then, as naturally as it arrived, the bird flies away. Most people would smile at the memory of hearing such a peaceful sound. But imagine becoming upset because the bird did not continue singing for the rest of the day. Imagine believing something beautiful had become unfair simply because it ended. Suddenly, the suffering would not come from the silence that followed. It would come from the expectation that the song should never have stopped. Our minds often treat life in exactly this way. We experience moments of happiness and immediately begin asking how to preserve them forever. We meet someone kind and silently hope they will never change. We accomplish a goal and secretly wish the feeling of success would remain exactly as intense every day afterward. We enjoy good health and begin assuming it will always remain the same. Without realizing it, we replace gratitude with expectation. Then, when life continues following its natural rhythm, disappointment quietly appears. The Buddha observed that expectations become heavy not because hoping is wrong, but because expecting permanence from changing conditions asks reality to become something it cannot be. This insight does not remove hope from our lives. Instead, it transforms hope into presence. Rather than saying, "I hope this moment lasts forever," we begin saying, "I am grateful this moment exists at all." That small shift changes the entire emotional landscape of the heart. Gratitude opens the hands. Attachment closes them. One welcomes experience. The other attempts to imprison it. Imagine holding a handful of water from a peaceful stream. If your fingers remain relaxed, the coolness can be felt for a beautiful moment. But the harder you squeeze, the faster the water escapes. Peace often behaves in the same way. The more desperately we chase it, the farther away it seems to move. Yet, when we become gentle, when we stop demanding that every pleasant feeling remain forever, peace quietly returns on its own. There is another misunderstanding that many people carry without noticing. They believe acceptance means giving up. They imagine that accepting change requires abandoning ambition, relationships, or personal growth. But acceptance has never meant refusing to act. Acceptance simply means seeing clearly before deciding how to respond. Imagine standing outside during a light rain. You can acknowledge that it is raining while still choosing to open an umbrella. Denying the rain does not keep you dry. Complaining about the rain does not stop the clouds. Clear seeing always comes before wise action. In the same way, accepting that life changes does not prevent you from working toward meaningful goals. It simply frees you from the impossible task of controlling every outcome. This freedom allows energy that was once spent resisting reality to become available for compassion, creativity, patience, and wisdom. Perhaps you have already experienced this without realizing it. Think back to a challenge that once seemed overwhelming. Maybe it was a difficult season at work, a painful misunderstanding, a period of uncertainty, or a dream that unfolded differently than expected. At the time, it may have felt endless. You may have believed life would never feel peaceful again. Yet here you are now, listening quietly, breathing steadily, looking back at something that has already changed. The emotion that once seemed permanent eventually softened. The circumstances shifted. Even your understanding of that experience may have become gentler over time. This is not because life became perfect. It is because change never stopped doing what change has always done. It continued moving. The mind often tells stories that reality itself never confirms. It whispers, "This feeling will last forever." It says, "You will always be this anxious." It insists, "Nothing will ever improve." But if you look honestly at your own life, how many emotions have actually remained unchanged? How many fears stayed exactly the same year after year? How many joyful moments remained frozen forever? Everything has continued flowing, even when the mind insisted otherwise. This realization is not intended to erase your emotions. Every feeling deserves kindness. Every season of life deserves patience. The invitation is simply to stop believing that any passing experience is your permanent identity. Anxiety may visit, but it is not your name. Sadness may arrive, but it is not your future. Joy may blossom, but it also asks to be appreciated rather than possessed. The quiet observer within you remains present through every changing experience, just as the open sky remains untouched while clouds continue passing across it. This understanding gently reshapes the way we meet ourselves. Instead of asking, "How do I make this feeling disappear?" we begin asking, "Can I allow this feeling to move through me without becoming its prisoner?" That single question softens the struggle. Instead of fighting every wave, we begin learning how to float. Instead of fearing every ending, we begin recognizing that every ending quietly prepares the space for a beginning we cannot yet imagine. Tonight, as the silence around you grows deeper and your breathing becomes a little slower, allow yourself to consider that perhaps you have been carrying expectations that no longer need to be carried. Perhaps some of your exhaustion has come not from life itself, but from asking life to remain still while it has always been gently flowing forward. There is no need to force yourself to let go all at once. Simply notice where your heart has been holding too tightly. Notice where your thoughts continue asking yesterday to become today again. Then, with the same kindness you would offer a dear friend, allow your grip to soften just a little. You may discover that the peace you have been searching for has never been waiting at the end of perfect circumstances. It has been quietly growing every time you choose to meet change with awareness instead of fear, gratitude instead of possession, and gentle acceptance instead of resistance. As the first light of morning slowly touched the edge of a distant mountain, a young traveler arrived at a quiet monastery after walking many miles. His clothes were dusty. His face showed the weight of sleepless nights. And although his body had finally reached its destination, his mind was still wandering through places it could not leave behind. The old monk who welcomed him did not ask where he had come from, nor did he ask why he looked so tired. Instead, he simply smiled, offered him a warm cup of tea, and invited him to sit beneath a large maple tree whose leaves moved gently with every passing breeze. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The young traveler kept looking at the tea in his hands, as though hoping its warmth might somehow untangle the confusion inside his heart. Finally, he broke the silence. "Master," he said softly, I have lost so much. People I loved have changed. Dreams I worked for disappeared. Every time I begin to feel happy, I become afraid because I know it will not last. And every painful memory seems to remain with me much longer than I want. How can anyone live peacefully knowing that everything eventually changes? The old monk listened without interrupting. He did not hurry to answer. Instead, he looked toward the maple tree above them. A gentle breeze drifted through its branches, and one golden leaf slowly detached itself. It floated through the morning air without resistance, turning gracefully before landing on the ground beside them. The monk pointed toward the leaf and quietly asked, "Did you see sadness in that leaf as it fell?" The traveler looked puzzled. "No," he answered, "it simply fell." The monk nodded. "Then where did the sadness come from?" The traveler remained silent. The monk continued in the same calm voice. The tree did not cling to the leaf. The wind did not apologize for carrying it away. Even the earth welcomed it without complaint. Only the human mind imagines that something natural has become a tragedy simply because it has changed. The traveler lowered his eyes, thinking carefully about those words. After a few moments, he replied, "But if the tree could speak, perhaps it would miss the leaf." The monk smiled warmly. "Perhaps, but missing something is different from demanding that it never leave. Love is natural. Gratitude is natural. Even sadness has its place. Suffering begins when the mind insists that life should stop moving." The traveler watched another leaf drift gently through the air. This time, he noticed something he had overlooked before. The branch that had released one leaf was already making room for another season. Nothing looked broken. Nothing appeared incomplete. The entire forest seemed to trust a rhythm that required no explanation. The monk lifted the cup of tea resting beside him. Steam rose quietly into the cool morning air. "Tell me," he asked, "what makes this tea comforting?" The traveler answered without hesitation, "Its warmth." The monk nodded again. "And what if it stayed warm forever? Would you still notice it?" The young man thought for a moment before shaking his head. "Probably not." "Exactly," the monk said. "Its warmth is precious because it changes. You appreciate it because you know it will not remain exactly the same. Life offers us countless gifts in the same way. We suffer less when we stop asking every beautiful moment to become permanent." The traveler slowly raised the cup to his lips. He noticed its warmth more deeply than before, as though hearing those words had awakened a part of his awareness that had been asleep for many years. He realized that for most of his life, he had enjoyed pleasant experiences while quietly fearing their ending at the very same time. Even during moments of happiness, part of his mind had already begun grieving a future loss that had not yet arrived. The monk seemed to sense this realization. Many people believe they are suffering because life keeps changing, he said. In truth, they often suffer because they are trying to enjoy tomorrow before tomorrow arrives, and trying to preserve yesterday after it has already passed. In doing so, they miss the only place where peace has ever existed. The traveler looked around the peaceful garden. The morning breeze continued moving gently through the trees. Birds landed briefly before flying away again. Sunlight slowly shifted across the stone path. Every detail seemed alive because nothing remained exactly the same. So should I stop caring? The traveler asked quietly. Should I stop loving people if they might leave someday? The monk's expression became even gentler. No, he replied. Love them more fully because they are here today. Listen more carefully because this conversation will never happen again in exactly the same way. Be grateful for every shared meal, every laugh, every quiet moment, every sunrise, every ordinary afternoon. Impermanence does not ask you to love less. It teaches you how to love without fear becoming the center of your heart. The traveler felt those words settle within him like gentle rain soaking into dry soil. For the first time in many months, he noticed that his breathing had become slower. The constant pressure inside his chest had softened, not because his past had changed, but because his relationship with the past had begun to change. The monk reached toward the ground and picked up the fallen maple leaf. He held it carefully between his fingers before placing it back onto the earth. Nothing in nature clings to what it has already completed, he said. The river does not chase yesterday's water. The sunrise does not argue with the night. Even this leaf knows when to let go. Only the human mind believes holding tighter will stop time from moving. The traveler remained silent for a long while. He watched the breeze continue through the garden exactly as it had before he arrived. Nothing outside had become different, yet everything inside seemed slightly lighter. The questions that had once demanded immediate answers no longer felt so urgent. He understood that the monk had not offered a complicated philosophy or an impossible practice. He had simply invited him to observe the world honestly. Everywhere he looked, life was quietly demonstrating the same lesson. The trees released their leaves. The clouds crossed the sky. Morning became afternoon without resistance. Even his own breath arrived, remained for only a moment, and gently departed. Sitting beneath the maple tree, with a cup of tea gradually cooling in his hands, the traveler finally understood that peace had never depended upon preventing change. Peace had always been waiting inside the willingness to move with life as naturally as every leaf, every breeze, every river, and every new dawn. Inevitably, after hearing the old monk's gentle words, the traveler found himself wondering about something that had troubled him for years. If life naturally flows from one moment to the next, why does the human mind seem determined to stand still? Why does the heart return again and again to memories that have already faded into yesterday. As these questions quietly unfolded within him, the monastery remained wrapped in the peaceful rhythm of the morning. The tea had cooled. The sunlight had climbed a little higher across the stone path. The maple leaves continued their slow dance with the breeze, asking nothing from the sky except permission to move. The monk seemed to notice the young man's silent reflection before another question was even spoken. "There is something else you are carrying," he said softly. "Not in your hands, but in your mind." The traveler nodded. "I understand that everything changes," he replied. "At least I understand it with my thoughts, but my heart does not seem to listen. Even when I know I should let something go, another part of me keeps holding on. Why does that happen?" The monk smiled with quiet compassion. "Because the mind believes attachment is protection." The traveler looked confused. "Protection from what?" "From uncertainty," the monk answered. "The mind would rather hold tightly to a familiar sadness than step into an unknown tomorrow. It mistakes certainty for safety, even when that certainty is painful." Those words settled into the silence between them. The traveler remembered nights when he had replayed old conversations over and over again. None of those memories had changed. None of them had offered new answers. Yet returning to them had become almost automatic, as though his thoughts believed they might finally discover the perfect ending if they repeated the story often enough. The monk picked up a small pebble resting near the path and placed it gently into the traveler's open hand. "Hold this," he said. The traveler closed his fingers around the smooth stone. "Now imagine carrying it everywhere you go," the monk continued. "Carry it while you eat. Carry it while you sleep. Carry it while you walk through forests and villages. Carry it for months. Carry it for years. Eventually, your hand will become tired, not because the stone has become heavier, but because you have never allowed yourself to put it down." The traveler slowly opened his hand and looked at the pebble resting quietly in his palm. It had done nothing. It had asked for nothing. Yet simply imagining holding it for years made his fingers feel tired. The monk nodded toward the stone. "Many people believe life is exhausting," he said. "Often it is not life that exhausts them. It is the effort required to keep carrying what no longer needs to be carried." The traveler looked thoughtfully at the pebble before placing it back on the ground. "Then why do we keep picking it up?" he asked. The monk answered without hesitation. "Because we believe our pain has become part of our identity. We begin saying, 'This disappointment is my story. This regret is who I am. This fear protects me. This memory defines me.' Little by little, we stop seeing these experiences as visitors and begin treating them as permanent residents." A gentle breeze moved once again through the monastery garden. The traveler noticed that the fallen leaves remained exactly where they had landed. None of them struggled to return to the branches above. None of them argued with the season. They simply rested where life had gently placed them. The monk followed his gaze. Nature never confuses movement with failure, he said. A flower does not believe it has failed because its petals eventually fall. The river does not believe it has lost itself because different water passes through its banks each day. Only the human mind creates the idea that change means something precious has been taken away forever. The traveler closed his eyes for a brief moment. He thought about the many versions of himself that had already disappeared without his noticing. The child who once feared the first day of school no longer existed. The teenager who believed every disappointment would last forever had quietly changed. Even the person who had arrived at the monastery yesterday already felt slightly different from the one sitting beneath the maple tree now. Every stage of his life had come, remained for a while, and gently passed into memory. Yet throughout every season, something had quietly remained present. There had always been an awareness watching each chapter unfold. "Master," he said softly, "if everything changes, who is it that notices the change?" The monk's eyes brightened with kindness. "That," he replied, "is a beautiful question. Notice that thoughts change, yet something notices those thoughts. Emotions change, yet something quietly witnesses those emotions. Your body changes from childhood through adulthood and beyond. Yet there is an awareness that has accompanied every stage. When you rest in that awareness, instead of becoming lost inside every passing experience, life begins to feel less like a battle and more like a flowing river." The traveler remained silent, allowing those words to settle naturally. He realized that for years he had believed every thought deserved to be followed, every fear deserved to be solved immediately, and every uncomfortable emotion required urgent attention. Yet, perhaps thoughts were not commands. Perhaps emotions were not permanent truths. Perhaps they were more like the clouds drifting overhead, appearing in countless shapes before quietly dissolving into the open sky. The monk continued speaking in the same calm voice. "The mind is a wonderful servant, but it becomes a difficult master when we believe every story it tells. Sometimes it whispers that happiness can only exist after everything becomes certain. Sometimes it insists that peace must wait until every unanswered question receives an answer. But life has never worked that way. Peace does not arrive because uncertainty disappears. Peace grows when you discover that uncertainty has always been part of the natural rhythm of being alive." The traveler took a slow, steady breath. For the first time in many years, he did not feel pressured to solve every mystery of his life before allowing himself to rest. The leaves continued moving gently above him. The birds sang without worrying whether another song would follow. The breeze arrived without announcing itself and departed without regret. Everything around him quietly demonstrated a truth that no argument could improve. The world had never resisted its own unfolding. Only the mind had done that. Sitting beneath the ancient maple tree, surrounded by the quiet wisdom of ordinary things, the traveler began to understand that letting go was not an act of losing. It was an act of no longer mistaking temporary experiences for permanent identity. And in that gentle understanding, something inside him relaxed just enough to feel the first unmistakable taste of freedom. Inevitably, the traveler remained beneath the maple tree long after the conversation had become quiet. Neither he nor the old monk felt any need to fill the silence with more words. Somewhere nearby, water flowed gently over smooth stones, creating the kind of peaceful sound that asks nothing from the listener except attention. The breeze carried the scent of pine through the monastery courtyard, and for the first time in many months, the traveler noticed how much of life continued beautifully without needing his approval. As he watched another leaf drift toward the earth, a new question slowly formed within him. If I stop holding so tightly, he asked, how do I know I will not become careless? How do I know I will not lose everything that matters? The old monk smiled, not because the question was simple, but because nearly every human heart eventually asks it. There is a difference, he said softly, between holding something with open hands and gripping it with closed fists. One allows life to breathe. The other slowly exhausts both the hands and the heart. The traveler looked down at his own hands, resting quietly on his knees. They were no longer holding the small pebble from earlier, yet they did not feel empty. Instead, they felt strangely lighter. The monk reached toward a nearby bamboo branch that bent gracefully in the wind. Watch the bamboo, he said. When the wind becomes stronger, does it argue with the breeze? Does it try to prove its strength by refusing to move? The traveler shook his head. It bends. Yes, the monk replied. And because it bends, it rarely breaks. Flexibility is not weakness. It is wisdom living in harmony with reality. The traveler continued watching the bamboo sway with effortless grace. Each movement seemed almost like a dance, never hurried, never fearful, never trying to remain perfectly still. Suddenly, he realized that the bamboo was not surrendering to the wind because it had given up. It moved because resisting every gust would only create unnecessary strain. The monk continued. Many people spend years trying to become unshakable by controlling everything around them. They believe certainty will finally bring peace. They organize every detail, rehearse every possible outcome, and worry about situations that have not yet arrived. Yet, despite all that effort, their hearts remain restless because life continues changing anyway. Peace does not come from mastering every circumstance. It comes from learning how to remain gentle while circumstances continue changing. Those words echoed quietly inside the traveler's mind. He remembered countless evenings when he had tried to predict tomorrow before allowing himself to rest. He had imagined conversations that never happened. He had solved problems that never appeared. He had carried fears that never became reality. Looking back, he realized how much of his suffering had been created not by events themselves, but by the endless effort to stay ahead of an uncertain future. The monk picked up an empty wooden bowl resting beside him and placed it carefully on the ground. "Tell me," he asked, "what makes this bowl useful?" The traveler answered, "Its shape." The monk smiled gently. "Look again." The traveler studied the bowl more closely before slowly replying, "Perhaps." The empty space inside it. "Exactly," the monk said. "Without that empty space, it could hold nothing. What appears empty is actually what makes the bowl valuable." The traveler remained thoughtful. The monk continued, "The human heart is much the same. We often try to fill every quiet moment with plans, memories, worries, distractions, and endless thinking. We become afraid of stillness because stillness feels unfamiliar. Yet, it is the open space within the mind that allows wisdom to enter. If your hands are always full, how can they receive a gift? If your thoughts are always crowded, how can peace find a place to rest? The traveler closed his eyes for a few slow breaths. He noticed how quickly the mind reached for something to think about. A memory appeared, then faded. A concern briefly surfaced before dissolving on its own. Another thought arrived, asking what tomorrow might bring. Instead of chasing it, he simply watched it pass. To his surprise, nothing terrible happened. The world continued exactly as before. The birds continued singing. The breeze continued moving through the trees. His breathing continued without effort. The monk quietly observed him before saying, "Notice that you did not force those thoughts to leave. You simply stopped inviting them to stay." The traveler opened his eyes and smiled faintly. "It felt easier than I expected, because the mind naturally settles when we stop arguing with it," the monk replied. "Imagine standing beside a clear pond. If you constantly stir the water, you will never see your reflection. But if you allow the surface to become still on its own, clarity appears without effort. Peace often arrives in exactly the same way." The traveler looked toward the nearby pond, where the surrounding trees reflected softly across the calm surface. Every now and then, a gentle ripple appeared before disappearing naturally. The reflection returned without anyone forcing it. He realized that his own mind had been like water constantly stirred by fear, regret, and expectation. It had not needed more effort. It had needed less interference. The monk continued speaking in a voice as calm as the flowing stream nearby. "Do not misunderstand this practice. You are not trying to eliminate every thought. Thoughts belong to the mind, just as clouds belong to the sky. The practice is simply remembering that you are the open sky, not every passing cloud. Some clouds bring rain, others bring bright sunlight. None of them remain forever. The sky never struggles to remove them. It simply allows them to pass. The traveler slowly lifted his face toward the wide blue sky stretching above the monastery. A few white clouds drifted peacefully across its endless openness. None of them asked permission to arrive. None of them apologized for leaving. Yet, the sky remained vast and unchanged beneath them all. Something inside him relaxed even more deeply. For years, he had believed peace required creating the perfect life. Now, he was beginning to understand that peace might simply be the quiet recognition that every experience, pleasant or difficult, would eventually move through the spacious awareness that had always been there. As the afternoon light gradually softened across the monastery garden, the traveler no longer felt the urgent need to solve every uncertainty before allowing himself to breathe. He understood that tomorrow would bring its own changing weather, just as every yesterday had done before it. But for this single moment, beneath the maple tree, beside the gently flowing water, with the bamboo swaying peacefully in the breeze and the empty bowl resting silently upon the earth, he experienced something that could never be created through force alone. He experienced the quiet freedom that appears when the heart finally trusts life enough to stop resisting its gentle, endless flow. Inevitably, as the afternoon slowly gave way to the quiet colors of evening, the monastery became even more peaceful. Long shadows stretched gently across the stone paths, and the golden light resting on the maple leaves seemed softer than before. The traveler had not noticed how many hours had passed. Time itself appeared to have become lighter, no longer something to chase or measure, but something simply unfolding one quiet breath after another. The old monk stood and began walking toward a small wooden bridge that crossed the narrow stream flowing through the monastery garden. Without speaking, he invited the traveler to follow. Together, they walked in silence, listening only to the steady music of flowing water and the occasional song of birds settling into the coming night. When they reached the bridge, the monk rested both hands lightly upon its smooth wooden railing. The traveler looked down into the stream below. Clear water moved endlessly around stones that had remained in place for many years. Leaves floated past without hesitation, disappearing around the bend before another leaf quietly arrived. The monk asked, "Can you step into the same river twice?" The traveler smiled gently. "No, the water has already moved on." The monk nodded. Yet many people spend their lives trying to step back into yesterday. They revisit old conversations, old versions of themselves, old disappointments, hoping that somehow the river will become yesterday's river again. Every visit leaves them more exhausted because the river has never stopped flowing. The traveler continued watching the current. He realized there had been many seasons of his own life that he had secretly tried to return to. There were friendships that belonged to another chapter, dreams that had served an earlier version of himself, and moments of happiness that his heart had quietly asked life to repeat. He had believed he was honoring those memories. Perhaps, without realizing it, he had been asking the river to flow backward. The monk seemed to understand exactly where the traveler's thoughts had gone. Memories are beautiful guests, he said softly, but they become difficult masters when we insist on living inside them. The purpose of memory is gratitude, not imprisonment. Those words settled deeply within the traveler. He remembered how often a single memory could steal an entire evening. Familiar song, an old photograph, a place he had not visited for years, and suddenly his mind would begin rebuilding a world that no longer existed. Hours would disappear while his body remained in the present, but his attention wandered somewhere that time itself could never return. The monk bent down and gently lifted a fallen leaf from the edge of the stream. Holding it between his fingers, he said, "This leaf belongs to the tree, but not forever. It belongs to the wind, but not forever. It belongs to the river, but not forever. Soon it will belong to the earth, and from the earth, new life will quietly emerge. Nothing is truly lost. It simply changes its form." The traveler looked at the leaf differently than before. Earlier, he had seen only an ending. Now he saw movement. He saw participation in something much larger than a single season. The monk carefully released the leaf into the water. Neither of them tried to follow it with their eyes once it disappeared around the curve of the stream. There was no need. The journey belonged to the leaf now. People often fear letting go, the monk continued, because they imagine letting go means forgetting. But forgetting is not required. You may remember someone with gratitude without carrying them as a burden. You may honor the past without asking it to become your future. You may love deeply without demanding that every chapter remain open forever. The traveler slowly breathed in the cool evening air. Those words reached places inside him that logic alone had never touched. He realized that much of his pain had not come from the endings themselves. It had come from believing that remembering required continuing to suffer. Somehow his heart had confused loyalty with endless sorrow. The monk smiled as if hearing the unspoken realization. There is a quiet kindness hidden inside every ending, he said. An ending creates space. Space allows something new to arrive. If autumn refused to release its leaves, how would spring ever dress the branches in fresh green? If yesterday never completed itself, how could today begin? The traveler watched the fading sunlight reflecting across the moving water. The stream never argued with the leaves it carried away. It never paused to mourn the water that had already passed. Yet it was never empty. Every moment new water arrived. Every moment something quietly continued. He suddenly understood that life had never asked him to stop appreciating what had been. It had only asked him not to stop living because of what had been. The old monk looked toward the distant mountains, where the first colors of twilight had begun painting the horizon. There is another reason people resist change, he said. They believe certainty creates security. But tell me, has life ever truly been certain? The traveler smiled softly before shaking his head. No. Then, perhaps what you have been searching for does not exist outside you. Perhaps real security is not knowing what tomorrow brings. Perhaps it is trusting that whatever tomorrow brings, you can meet it with awareness, kindness, and an open heart. The traveler remained silent. Those words did not feel like advice. They felt like recognition. Somewhere deep inside, he realized he had spent years preparing for futures that never arrived, while overlooking the quiet miracle of the present moment. Even now, standing upon the small wooden bridge, surrounded by the gentle sounds of evening, there was nothing missing. The air was enough. The flowing water was enough. The fading light was enough. His next breath was enough. The monk rested one hand lightly against the wooden railing. Look at the stream one last time, he said. The traveler obeyed. Can you find the exact drop of water that passed beneath this bridge a moment ago? No, the traveler answered. Can you stop the next drop from arriving? No. The monk smiled warmly. Then why ask your own life to behave differently? Let each moment come. Let each moment go. Meet each one fully, and allow each one to leave when its time is complete. This is not the loss of life. This is the rhythm that allows life to remain beautifully alive. As the last light of day slowly disappeared beyond the mountains, the traveler no longer felt the desperate need to hold every beautiful experience forever. Instead, he felt something quieter, something steadier. He felt grateful that beauty could visit at all. And standing above the endlessly flowing stream, listening to water that never repeated itself, yet never ceased to exist, he understood that perhaps the deepest peace is not found by escaping change, but by trusting the gentle wisdom carried within every moment that arrives, every moment that departs, and every silent space in between. Inevitably, night settled gently over the monastery, wrapping the mountains in a quiet blue darkness that seemed less like the end of a day and more like an invitation to rest. Tiny lanterns glowed along the stone pathways. Their warm light reflected softly in the stream that continued its endless journey through the garden. The traveler remained beside the old monk, yet neither of them felt the need to hurry back indoors. There was something about the silence of the evening that made every lesson feel deeper, as though the night itself had become another teacher. Above them, countless stars slowly revealed themselves one by one. The traveler looked upward and whispered, "When I first arrived here, I believed peace was something I needed to find. Now, I wonder if it has always been here, hidden beneath everything I refused to accept." The old monk smiled gently, but did not answer immediately. Instead, he pointed toward the moon reflected upon the surface of the stream. The reflection shimmered beautifully as the water flowed beneath it. "Tell me," the monk asked softly, "has the moon been broken because the water keeps moving?" The traveler looked carefully. The reflection stretched and trembled with every ripple, yet the moon above remained perfectly whole. "No," he answered, "only the reflection changes." The monk nodded. "Your mind is like the water. Awareness is like the moon. When the surface is disturbed, you believe your true nature has become disturbed as well. But what you truly are has never been damaged by passing thoughts, changing emotions, or the many seasons of your life. Only the reflection keeps changing." Those words settled into the traveler's heart with surprising tenderness. For years, he had measured himself by the condition of his thoughts. On peaceful days, he believed he was doing well. On anxious days, he believed something inside him had become broken. He had never questioned whether the changing mind and the quiet awareness behind it were two different things. The monk continued, "Many people spend their lives trying to calm every ripple before allowing themselves to feel peaceful. They believe they must eliminate uncertainty, remove every fear, answer every question, and perfect every circumstance. Yet look at the moon. It never asks the river to stop flowing before it continues shining." The traveler remained completely still. The stream moved. The lanterns flickered gently in the evening breeze. Somewhere beyond the trees, an owl called softly into the night. Everything around him continued changing exactly as it had all day, yet nothing felt hurried anymore. The monk reached into the sleeve of his robe and removed a tiny seed. Placing it carefully into the traveler's open palm, he said, "Do you see this seed?" "Yes," the traveler replied. "Can you tell me where the tree is?" The traveler smiled faintly. "It has not grown yet." The monk gently shook his head. "Look again. The tree is already here, although you cannot yet see it. Given enough rain, enough sunlight, enough patience, it will reveal what has always been quietly waiting within." The traveler looked thoughtfully at the tiny seed resting in his hand. It appeared so small, so ordinary, almost insignificant. Yet somehow it contained an entire future hidden inside its silent simplicity. The monk continued, "Wisdom grows the same way. Most people search for dramatic moments that transform everything overnight. They overlook the quiet changes that happen one breath, one choice, one act of awareness at a time. Every moment you notice your attachment without feeding it, the seed grows. Every moment you choose gratitude instead of fear, the seed grows. Every moment you allow a difficult emotion to pass without becoming its prisoner, the seed grows. Transformation is rarely loud. More often, it happens so gently that only time reveals how deeply you have changed. The traveler closed his fingers carefully around the seed. Suddenly, he remembered the person who had arrived at the monastery only a day before. That version of himself had carried questions that now seemed less urgent. His circumstances had not changed. The people from his past remained part of his story. The future was still uncertain, yet something fundamental had shifted. He no longer believed peace depended upon controlling every chapter of his life. He had begun trusting the quiet wisdom that carried every chapter forward. The monk walked slowly toward an ancient pine tree standing near the edge of the courtyard. Its trunk bore the marks of many decades, perhaps even centuries. Storms had visited it. Winters had covered it with snow. Summers had surrounded it with warmth. Autumn had released countless needles into the wind. Yet it remained deeply rooted. Why does this tree remain standing? The monk asked. The traveler studied it carefully before answering. Because its roots reach deeper than the changing weather. The monk's eyes brightened. Exactly. People often spend their lives strengthening branches while neglecting roots. They build identities from success, appearance, approval, possessions, and certainty. Then the first strong wind arrives, and everything feels threatened. But when your roots grow into awareness, compassion, and understanding, the seasons may still change, yet your heart remembers where home truly is. The traveler rested one hand gently against the rough bark of the old pine. He could almost imagine the countless springs, summers, autumns, and winters the tree had witnessed without complaint. It had never asked one season to remain forever. It had never resisted another simply because it brought change. It had welcomed each chapter as part of the same unfolding life. The monk's voice became almost a whisper. You have spent much of your life asking, how do I keep happiness from leaving? Perhaps a gentler question is, how do I remain open enough to welcome whatever life places before me? The traveler felt those words settle into a place beyond thought. He understood that openness was not the same as passivity. It required courage. It required trusting life, even when tomorrow remained unknown. It required releasing the illusion that certainty could ever become permanent. Above them, the moon climbed higher into the night sky. Its reflection continued dancing upon the moving stream, changing with every ripple while never losing its quiet light. The lanterns glowed softly. The pine tree stood peacefully. The seed rested safely within the traveler's hand, and somewhere deep within his own heart, another unseen seed had begun to grow. It was not a seed of certainty. It was not a seed of control. It was the quiet beginning of a wisdom that no longer feared change, because it had finally discovered something far more enduring than changing circumstances. It had discovered the silent awareness that remained present through every sunrise and sunset, every arrival and departure, every joy and every sorrow, patiently waiting beneath the surface of every passing moment, just as the moon continues shining, whether the river is calm or filled with gentle ripples. Inevitably, the traveler remained awake long after the monastery had fallen completely silent. The old monk had quietly returned to his simple room, leaving him alone beneath the wide night sky. Yet, for the first time in many years, being alone no longer felt like emptiness. It felt like space. The lanterns continued glowing softly along the stone path, their warm light gently fading into the surrounding darkness. Somewhere nearby, the stream continued flowing with the same patient rhythm it had carried from dawn until now. Nothing about the monastery demanded attention, and perhaps because of that, everything seemed to reveal itself more clearly. The traveler slowly walked toward the small garden where smooth stones surrounded a shallow pond. He sat beside the water and looked into its still surface. The moon floated there once again, peaceful and undisturbed. Every now and then, a tiny breeze crossed the pond, creating delicate ripples that briefly reshaped the reflection before it quietly settled again. Earlier that evening, the old monk had spoken about the difference between awareness and the changing mind. Now, sitting alone, the traveler decided not to think about those words. Instead, he simply watched. A thought appeared. It reminded him of someone he had not seen for many years. The familiar ache began to rise, almost automatically. In the past, he would have followed the memory wherever it wished to lead him. He would have replayed old conversations, imagined different endings, searched for answers that no longer existed. Tonight, something different happened. He noticed the memory arrive just as he had noticed the breeze touching the pond. It appeared. It lingered for a few quiet moments. Then, without being pushed away, it gently faded. Another thought arrived. This one carried worry about the future. Questions began forming. What if life became difficult again? What if peace disappeared tomorrow? What if he forgot everything he had learned at the monastery? Again, he simply watched. The questions rose like small waves before dissolving into the stillness beneath them. Nothing had been forced. Nothing had been denied. For the first time, he realized that thoughts often remained powerful only because he kept feeding them with more thoughts. Left alone, many of them quietly completed themselves. The night became even quieter. Crickets sang from the grass beyond the garden walls. A cool breeze carried the fragrance of cedar through the courtyard. Every sound appeared for a moment before giving way to silence once again. The traveler suddenly noticed that nature never hurried to replace one sound with another. The silence itself was never empty. It was full of quiet life waiting without impatience. He smiled softly, remembering how differently his own mind had behaved. It had always rushed to fill every quiet moment. If one worry disappeared, another immediately stepped forward. If one goal was accomplished, another quickly demanded attention. There had always been another mountain to climb, another answer to find, another future to prepare for. Yet sitting beside the pond, he began wondering whether the endless search itself had been keeping him from noticing what had always been here. Just then, the old monk quietly returned, carrying 2 small cups of warm herbal tea. Without a word, he placed one beside the traveler and sat comfortably on the smooth stone nearby. They shared the silence for several minutes before the monk finally asked, "What have you discovered?" The traveler looked toward the pond before answering. "I noticed something surprising. My thoughts seem much less frightening when I stop chasing them." The monk nodded gently. Because thoughts borrow their strength from your attention. They arrive on their own, but they remain only when invited. The traveler reflected on those words. Then is peace simply the absence of thinking? The monk smiled warmly. No, peace is not an empty mind. Peace is a mind that no longer argues with every thought it creates. The traveler looked down into his cup as gentle steam rose into the cool night air. The warmth rested comfortably in his hands. He remembered the tea from earlier that morning, and suddenly another understanding appeared. The tea had cooled. The sunlight had become moonlight. Morning had become night. Every lesson of the day had quietly demonstrated the same truth through different forms. Nothing had remained exactly the same, yet nothing truly precious had been lost. Instead, each moment had naturally made room for the next. The monk lifted his cup and looked toward the stars scattered across the dark sky. "Do you know why people become so tired?" he asked. The traveler thought for a moment before quietly shaking his head. "Because they carry yesterday into today and tomorrow into tonight. Their bodies live in one place, while their minds try to live in 3 different times at once. That is a very heavy way to travel through life." The traveler felt those words settle deeply within him. How many evenings had he spent replaying old mistakes while simultaneously fearing future disappointments? How many beautiful moments had passed unnoticed because his attention had been somewhere else entirely? He realized that the present moment had never actually abandoned him. More often, he had quietly abandoned it. The monk continued, "Notice this cup of tea. You are not asking it to remain warm forever. You simply enjoy its warmth while it is here. When it cools, you do not become angry with the tea. Why should life be treated differently?" The traveler laughed softly, not because the question was amusing, but because it revealed something so obvious he had somehow overlooked it for years. He had expected life to obey rules he would never expect from the seasons, the weather, the river, or even a simple cup of tea. The old monk placed his empty cup beside him and looked toward the pond one final time. "There will still be difficult days," he said quietly. "There will still be moments of uncertainty, moments of sadness, moments when your heart feels heavy again. Wisdom does not remove the changing seasons. It teaches you not to become lost inside them. Remember the sky when clouds appear. Remember the river when memories return. Remember the bamboo when strong winds arrive. Remember the seed when progress feels invisible. And remember this pond whenever your thoughts become restless, because beneath every ripple, stillness has never stopped existing." The traveler closed his eyes for a slow, gentle breath. He no longer felt as though he had collected a list of teachings to memorize. Instead, he felt as though life itself had quietly become his teacher. Every leaf, every stream, every sunrise, every fading star, every passing season now seemed to speak the same gentle language. Nothing asked to be possessed. Nothing asked to remain forever. Everything simply invited him to participate fully before gracefully making room for whatever came next. Sitting beneath the quiet stars beside the peaceful pond, with warm tea in his hands and the endless rhythm of flowing water beside him, he finally understood that the deepest freedom does not come from escaping change. It comes from no longer mistaking change for the enemy, and from discovering that beneath every passing thought, every changing season, and every unfolding chapter of life, there has always been a quiet place within that has known how to rest. Inevitably, the night grew deeper, and the monastery seemed to disappear into a silence so complete that even time itself felt as though it had slowed its pace. The lanterns had nearly burned down to their final gentle glow, and the stream continued its endless song beneath the stars, never repeating the same movement twice, yet never losing its quiet harmony. The traveler remained beside the old monk, not because he still needed answers, but because he had begun to understand that wisdom often grows best inside shared silence. For many years, he had believed that understanding arrived through collecting more knowledge. Tonight, he was beginning to discover something entirely different. Sometimes understanding arrives when there is finally enough stillness for truth to be heard. The old monk looked toward the eastern horizon, where the faintest suggestion of dawn had not yet appeared, but quietly waited beyond the darkness. "There is one final habit of the mind that causes great suffering," he said gently. "It is so ordinary that most people never notice it." The traveler listened carefully. "The mind constantly asks life to become something other than what it is," the monk continued. "It says this moment should be different. This person should be different. I should be different. The past should have unfolded differently. The future should arrive more quickly, even while surrounded by blessings. It quietly whispers that reality is not enough. The traveler lowered his eyes. Those words felt deeply familiar. He remembered countless ordinary mornings that he had hurried through without noticing. Cups of tea that had grown cold while he worried about tomorrow. Walks beneath open skies that had passed unnoticed because his attention had remained trapped inside unfinished conversations from years before. Entire seasons had quietly come and gone while he waited for life to begin somewhere else. The monk picked up a small lantern resting beside the path. Its flame flickered gently behind the thin paper walls. "Look closely," he said. "This lantern shines because it burns only what is inside it. Imagine asking it to illuminate the entire mountain at once. It would exhaust itself immediately. Yet, by quietly lighting the small space where it already stands, it fulfills its purpose perfectly." The traveler watched the soft light resting upon the nearby stones. It did not struggle against the darkness beyond its reach. It simply offered warmth where it already existed. The monk smiled. The human heart often tries to illuminate every tomorrow before it has fully lived today. It wants certainty about next year while overlooking the gift already resting in this single breath. No wonder it becomes tired. The traveler felt those words settle deeply inside him. He realized that exhaustion was not always created by hard work. Sometimes it was created by carrying responsibilities that belonged to moments which had not yet arrived. He had spent years attempting to solve future problems before they existed, believing preparation and worry were the same thing. They were not. Preparation acted when action was possible. Worry demanded certainty where certainty could never be found. A gentle wind moved through the courtyard, causing the lantern's flame to dance softly without going out. The monk pointed toward it. "Notice something important," he whispered. "The flame moves with the wind, yet it does not become the wind. In the same way, awareness experiences thoughts without becoming those thoughts. It experiences emotion without becoming emotion. This is why peace remains possible even when the mind is active." The traveler remained completely still. He remembered how often he had introduced himself to life through temporary conditions. "I am anxious. I am lost. I am broken. I am afraid." Tonight, those statements felt incomplete. Anxiety had visited him, but it had never stayed forever. Fear had appeared many times, but every fearful season had eventually changed. Even sorrow, which once seemed endless, had slowly transformed into memory. The awareness observing those experiences had quietly remained through every chapter. The monk continued. "When clouds cover the sky, children sometimes believe the sun has disappeared. Adults know the sun has simply become hidden from view. Wisdom is remembering that your deepest peace behaves the same way. Some days it feels obvious. Other days it seems far away, but it has never stopped existing. The traveler looked toward the stars above the monastery. A few clouds drifted slowly across the night, briefly hiding some of the brighter lights before moving gently onward. Nothing argued with them. Nothing tried to force them away. The sky remained vast enough to welcome both clear spaces and passing clouds without preference. He wondered how different his own life might have felt if he had treated his thoughts with the same quiet generosity. Instead of asking every uncomfortable feeling to disappear immediately, perhaps he could simply allow it to visit, knowing that no visitor remained forever. The monk stood slowly and began walking toward the edge of the garden, where a single stone bench overlooked the valley below. Together they sat without speaking. Far in the distance, tiny lights from sleeping villages shimmered softly beneath the stars. Every home contained lives unfolding in different ways. Somewhere people celebrated new beginnings. Somewhere others quietly said goodbye to old chapters. Somewhere children dreamed peacefully, while elders reflected on many seasons already lived. Every life moved within the same gentle rhythm of arrival and departure. The traveler suddenly understood that he had never been alone in his struggles. Every human heart learned, in its own time, how to meet change. The monk quietly broke the silence once more. You once believed that peace would arrive after life finally stopped changing. Now tell me, what do you see? The traveler took a slow breath before answering. I see that change was never standing in the way of peace. My resistance was. The monk smiled, not with pride, but with quiet recognition, as though watching a flower naturally open beneath the morning sun. Exactly, he said. The river was never your enemy. The seasons were never your enemy. Time itself was never your enemy. They have all been patiently teaching the same lesson from the beginning. The traveler closed his eyes. He listened to the stream. He felt the cool night air resting gently against his face. He noticed his breathing entering and leaving without effort. Nothing extraordinary had happened, yet everything felt different because he was no longer asking the moment to become something else before allowing himself to receive it. For the first time in many years, the silence around him no longer felt empty. It felt welcoming. The uncertainty of tomorrow no longer felt like a threat. It felt like open space where life would continue revealing itself one moment at a time. Sitting quietly beside the old monk as the final hours of night slowly prepared to welcome another dawn, the traveler understood that wisdom was not about escaping the changing world. It was about learning to stand gently within it, like the lantern that continued shining without trying to illuminate every mountain, like the stream that continued flowing without longing for yesterday's water, and like the open sky that never feared the passing clouds because it had always known they were only visitors. The first light of dawn had not yet reached the monastery, yet the darkness no longer felt endless. It had become gentle, almost comforting, like a quiet companion that asked nothing except honesty. The traveler remained seated beside the old monk on the weathered stone bench overlooking the sleeping valley. The air had grown cooler, carrying the fresh scent of cedar and distant rain that had fallen somewhere beyond the mountains during the night. The world seemed suspended between two breaths, between what had already ended and what had not yet begun. The traveler realized that this quiet space between night and morning resembled something within himself. For years, he had feared these in-between moments. He had always wanted certainty before taking another step. He had wanted every chapter to close neatly before allowing a new one to begin. Yet, life had never unfolded that way. There had always been unfinished conversations, unanswered questions, unexpected changes, and invisible roads stretching beyond the horizon. Somehow, he had mistaken uncertainty for danger, when perhaps uncertainty had simply been another name for possibility. The old monk looked toward the faint outline of the mountains and spoke so softly that his voice blended naturally with the sound of the flowing stream. There is one final illusion that quietly follows many people throughout their lives. It tells them that peace belongs somewhere else, somewhere after the next success, somewhere after the next relationship, somewhere after the next achievement, somewhere after everything has finally become perfect. The traveler lowered his gaze. He recognized that illusion immediately. He had lived beside it for years without realizing it was only a story. He had often believed that happiness would begin after solving one more problem. When that problem disappeared, another quietly took its place. The destination continued moving farther away, while the present moment remained unnoticed beneath his feet. The monk reached toward the ground and picked up a single smooth stone, polished by many years of rain and wind. He placed it gently into the traveler's hand. "This stone has not resisted the seasons," he said. "It has welcomed the rain, the sunlight, the cold, the warmth, the passing years. Look at its surface. What first appeared to be hardship slowly became beauty." The traveler slowly turned the stone in his hand. Its edges were soft, its surface smooth, not because life had protected it from change, but because change had patiently shaped it. He suddenly wondered whether the difficult seasons of his own life had also been quietly shaping him in ways he had never recognized. The monk seemed to read the question before it was spoken. "Many people ask why difficult experiences exist," he continued. "A gentler question is what those experiences have been quietly teaching. A river does not polish stone in a single afternoon. Wisdom also grows through patient contact with life as it truly is." The traveler closed his fingers around the stone and allowed those words to settle. Looking back across the years, he realized that his greatest moments of understanding had rarely appeared during times of comfort. They had emerged slowly after disappointment, uncertainty, loss, and unexpected change. Not because suffering itself was desirable, but because those seasons had gently loosened the illusion that everything could be controlled. They had opened places inside him where humility, compassion, and gratitude could quietly take root. The monk continued watching the eastern horizon, where the darkness had begun giving way to the faintest hint of silver light. "Notice the dawn," he whispered. "It never rushes the night away. It simply arrives. The darkness does not fail. It completes its purpose and gently makes room for morning." The traveler looked toward the horizon. The mountains had begun revealing their outlines with remarkable patience. Nothing dramatic happened. No sudden command announced the arrival of a new day. Light simply appeared little by little until the darkness naturally softened around it. Something inside the traveler recognized that same rhythm. Healing had never happened all at once. Understanding had never arrived in a single sentence. Even during his time at the monastery, peace had not appeared like a prize waiting at the end of perfect effort. It had quietly unfolded one observation, one breath, one gentle realization at a time. The monk smiled as the first bird began singing somewhere among the trees. People often become discouraged because they cannot see immediate transformation. They plant one seed and expect a forest by morning. Yet, every ancient tree was once invisible beneath the soil. Every sunrise begins with light too gentle for most people to notice. Never underestimate the quiet work that patience performs. The traveler listened carefully. He realized that he had spent much of his life judging himself too quickly. If fear returned, he believed he had failed. If sadness visited again, he assumed he had learned nothing. But now, he understood that even the seasons revisit the earth year after year without repeating themselves in exactly the same way. Growth was not measured by never experiencing difficulty again. It was measured by meeting each returning season with greater wisdom, greater kindness, and less resistance than before. The first rays of morning finally touched the highest peaks beyond the monastery. Their golden light slowly traveled downward across the mountainside, illuminating trees, fields, rooftops, and finally, the peaceful stream flowing through the garden. The traveler watched the light reach the water. The current had continued flowing all night, whether anyone had been watching or not. Suddenly, he understood that peace had behaved in much the same way. It had always been quietly present beneath the changing conditions of his life, waiting not to be created, but to be noticed. The monk stood slowly, his robe moving gently in the cool morning breeze. "When you leave this place," he said, "life will continue changing. Some days your heart will feel light, Other days, old habits may quietly return. Do not be discouraged. Simply remember what the river has shown you, what the bamboo has shown you, what the moon, the seed, the lantern, the empty bowl, the maple leaf, and this stone have all patiently revealed. They have never argued with change. They have simply lived in harmony with it. The traveler rose beside him. He looked across the awakening valley with eyes that seemed softer than the ones that had first arrived at the monastery. Nothing beyond the mountains had changed. The world still held uncertainty. People would still come and go. Joy and sorrow would continue visiting every human heart. Yet, something essential had become unmistakably clear. He no longer believed that peace belonged to a future version of his life. It belonged to this breath, this sunrise, this quiet willingness to meet whatever arrived without closing his heart. As the monastery welcomed another new morning, the traveler understood that every dawn carried the same silent invitation, not to become someone else, not to escape the changing world, but to awaken again to the quiet awareness that had remained present through every season, patiently waiting beneath every passing moment, like the first gentle light that never forces the darkness to leave, but simply shines until the whole world remembers it was never truly lost. As the morning light spread gently across the monastery, the traveler prepared to leave. Yet, he found himself standing still beneath the ancient maple tree, where his journey had quietly begun. The same branches that had welcomed him with falling leaves now shimmered softly beneath the golden light of dawn. The stream continued its endless song. The bamboo continued bending with the breeze. The old pine stood peacefully upon the hillside. Nothing had become extraordinary, yet everything seemed illuminated by a new kind of seeing. The old monk joined him without a sound, carrying no book, no scroll, and no final lesson written in words. Instead, he simply stood beside the traveler and looked toward the valley below. Villages were beginning to awaken. Thin trails of smoke rose gently from distant chimneys. Farmers slowly crossed quiet fields. Birds greeted another ordinary morning with songs they had sung countless times before. Yet each melody belonged only to this single day. The monk finally spoke. "Do you notice what has changed?" The traveler looked across the landscape before quietly answering, "Everything." The monk smiled gently. "And what has remained?" The traveler closed his eyes for a moment. He listened to the wind moving through the leaves, to the water flowing over stone, to the calm rhythm of his own breathing. Slowly, he opened his eyes again. "Awareness," he whispered. "The quiet presence that has been here through every thought, every fear, every memory, every lesson." The monk nodded. Many people spend their lives trying to protect themselves from change. Few realize they have been searching for something that has never needed protection. Those words settled into the traveler's heart more deeply than any lesson before them. Suddenly, he understood why the monastery had never tried to hide from the seasons. The trees did not fear autumn. The stream did not fear the passing current. The lantern did not fear the coming dawn. Every part of this place trusted the rhythm of existence because none of it depended upon remaining the same. Only the human mind imagined permanence where life had always offered movement. The traveler slowly reached into his pocket and found the tiny seed the monk had given him the night before. He held it in his palm beneath the morning sun. Such a small thing, almost weightless, yet it carried an entire forest hidden within its quiet form. He realized that wisdom often arrives the same way. At first, it seems almost too simple to matter. A single observation, a single breath taken with full attention, a single moment of choosing openness instead of resistance. None of these moments appear dramatic, yet together they slowly reshape an entire life. The monk noticed the seed resting in the traveler's hand. "Do not forget," he said softly, "a seed never struggles to become a tree. It simply follows its nature with patience. Human beings suffer because they often ask tomorrow to arrive before today has fully lived." The traveler smiled gently. For the first time, patience no longer felt like waiting. It felt like trust. He understood that growth did not require constant measurement. Just as no one stood beside the maple tree each morning, asking whether it had grown another inch overnight, wisdom also unfolded beyond the need for constant evaluation. It revealed itself naturally through the way one responded to ordinary moments. The monk began walking slowly along the garden path, inviting the traveler to follow one last time. Together, they passed every place where the previous day's lessons had quietly unfolded. They crossed the small wooden bridge above the flowing stream. They paused beside the still pond where the moon had reflected during the night. They walked past the bamboo that continued swaying with effortless grace. They stood beside the ancient pine, whose roots reached far deeper than any passing season. Finally, they arrived before the empty wooden bowl, resting exactly where it had been left. The monk lifted it carefully into his hands. "Yesterday, this bowl taught you about space," he said. "Today, it offers one final reminder." He turned the bowl upside down. Nothing fell from it. Then he turned it upright once more. Because it remains empty, it is always ready to receive. A heart that clings to yesterday cannot fully receive today. A mind crowded with fear cannot easily recognize peace already standing at the door. The traveler felt as though every lesson had quietly joined together into one simple understanding. The leaf, the river, the moon, the bamboo, the lantern, the seed, the stone, the bowl, the sunrise, the stream. None of them had spoken different truths. Each had reflected the same quiet wisdom through a different form. Suddenly, the traveler laughed softly, surprising even himself. The monk smiled. "What have you discovered?" The traveler answered with peaceful sincerity. "I came here believing life was making me suffer because it kept changing. Now, I see that life was patiently trying to free me from the illusion that anything was meant to stay the same." The monk's eyes filled with quiet warmth. "And what will you do when change visits again?" The traveler looked toward the valley where people were beginning another ordinary day. Somewhere children would laugh. Somewhere someone would say goodbye. Somewhere dreams would begin. Somewhere others would quietly end. Every heart would continue meeting joy and sorrow in its own time. He took one slow breath before answering. "I will remember the river instead of asking it to flow backward. I will remember the bamboo instead of becoming rigid. I will remember the sky instead of fearing every cloud. I will remember the seed whenever growth feels invisible. I will remember the empty bowl whenever my mind becomes crowded. Most of all, I will remember that peace has never depended on stopping change. It has always depended on meeting change with an open heart." The monk bowed gently, not as a farewell, but as an acknowledgement of a truth the traveler had finally seen for himself. There was nothing more to explain. Wisdom could not be handed from one person to another like an object. It could only be recognized when the heart became quiet enough to notice what had always been present. The traveler looked once more at the monastery that had become a mirror rather than a destination. He realized that nothing magical had happened during his stay. The mountains had remained mountains. The stream had continued flowing. The leaves had continued falling. The sun had continued rising. What had truly changed was not the world before him, but the way he now walked within it. And as he took his first steps toward the road leading away from the monastery, he no longer felt that he was leaving peace behind. He understood that the monastery had never created peace for him. It had simply shown him where it had quietly been waiting all along, beneath every changing season, beneath every passing thought, beneath every fear of losing, resting patiently within the silent awareness that no season could ever take away. Inevitably, the traveler walked beyond the monastery gates. Yet, after only a few quiet steps, he paused and gently turned back. The morning sun now rested fully upon the rooftops, the maple tree, the bamboo, the ancient pine, and the little stream that continued flowing exactly as it had before he arrived. Nothing asked him to stay. Nothing hurried him to leave. The monastery had never tried to hold anyone. It simply remained what it had always been, a quiet reminder that life itself is the greatest teacher when we finally become still enough to listen. The old monk remained standing near the entrance with the same peaceful smile that had welcomed the traveler on his first day. Neither of them felt the need for many words. Some truths become smaller when explained again They become larger when carried silently into ordinary life. The traveler bowed deeply, not because he believed the monk had given him something new, but because he now understood that the monk had gently helped him uncover something that had quietly lived within him all along. Then he turned once more and began walking down the narrow path that disappeared into the valley below. Every step felt different from the ones that had brought him there. The road itself had not changed. The mountains had not moved. The sky remained the same endless sky stretching beyond every horizon. Yet his heart no longer carried the heavy weight of demanding that life become different before allowing itself to be peaceful. As he walked, he noticed small things that would once have escaped his attention. Morning dew resting on blades of grass reflected tiny points of sunlight before slowly disappearing into the warmth of the day. A butterfly landed briefly upon a wildflower before drifting effortlessly into the open air. Gentle clouds crossed the blue sky without asking permission, changing their shape from moment to moment. Somewhere in the distance, children laughed as they began another ordinary day. A farmer greeted the morning with quiet patience. Birds continued singing without wondering whether tomorrow's song would sound the same. The traveler smiled because he finally understood that none of these moments asked to last forever. Their beauty existed precisely because they belonged completely to the present. He realized that for much of his life, he had overlooked thousands of quiet miracles while searching for one perfect future. He had believed peace was a destination waiting somewhere beyond the next achievement, the next answer, the next certainty. Yet, every lesson of the monastery had gently pointed in the opposite direction. Peace had never been hiding in tomorrow. It had always been waiting inside the willingness to meet this moment without resistance. As the path carried him farther from the monastery, he felt memories of his old life gently returning. Faces he had loved, mistakes he had regretted, dreams that had changed with time. Yet something remarkable had shifted. These memories no longer felt like chains pulling him backward. They felt like leaves floating peacefully upon the same river that continued carrying everything toward its natural destination. He did not need to throw them away. He did not need to cling to them either. He could simply allow them to pass through the wide sky of awareness with gratitude instead of fear. He remembered the maple leaf that had fallen without sorrow, the bamboo that bent without breaking, the empty bowl that remained useful because it did not insist on being full, the lantern that illuminated only the space where it stood, the seed that quietly carried an unseen forest, the smooth stone shaped patiently by countless seasons, the moon that remained whole, although its reflection danced upon moving water, the stream that never stopped flowing, and the sunrise that never argued with the darkness, but simply arrived in its own gentle time. Each image had become more than a lesson. They had become faithful companions he could carry wherever life might lead him. He understood now that difficult days would still arrive. There would still be moments when uncertainty whispered through his thoughts. There would still be days when loss visited, when plans changed unexpectedly, when the heart felt tender and the future remained unclear. But these moments no longer seemed like signs that peace had disappeared. They had become reminders to return once again to the quiet awareness beneath every changing experience. Just as the sky never becomes frightened by passing clouds, awareness never needs to fear passing thoughts. Just as the river does not mourn yesterday's water, life does not ask us to remain inside chapters that have already completed themselves. Just as the seasons trust one another without resistance, the heart can also learn to trust the unfolding rhythm of existence. Perhaps tonight, wherever you are listening, your own heart has been carrying something for far too long. Perhaps there is a memory you have tried to rewrite 1,000 times. Perhaps there is someone you have struggled to release, a future you have desperately tried to control, or a version of yourself you have quietly judged for many years. If so, there is nothing you need to force in this moment. There is nothing you need to solve before allowing yourself to rest. Simply notice your breathing. Notice the gentle rise and fall within your body. Notice that this single breath arrives without effort and leaves without fear. Life has been teaching through every breath since the day you were born. Nothing stays. Nothing needs to stay. And because everything moves, healing also moves. Because everything changes, pain can soften. Because every season completes itself, new beginnings quietly become possible. You do not need to push the river. You do not need to chase tomorrow. You do not need to carry yesterday any farther than this moment. Tonight, if your thoughts begin to wander, let them drift like leaves upon the water. If emotions rise, greet them with the same kindness the earth offers every falling leaf. If uncertainty appears, remember the bamboo that trusted the wind without surrendering its roots. If your heart feels crowded, remember the empty bowl and allow a little space to open within. If progress feels invisible, remember the tiny seed patiently becoming a forest beneath the soil. And if you ever wonder whether peace has left you, remember the moon reflected upon the moving stream. The reflection may tremble, but the moon has never been broken. In the same quiet way, beneath every changing thought, beneath every season of joy and sorrow, beneath every ending and every beginning, your deepest awareness has remained whole. As the traveler disappeared beyond the winding path and the monastery slowly faded into the distance, he carried no special treasure, no secret scroll, and no promise that life would never become difficult again. What he carried was far simpler and far more enduring. He carried the understanding that every moment, whether joyful or painful, arrives as a guest. Every breath teaches release. Every sunrise invites another beginning. Every ending quietly prepares the space for another unfolding. And when at last the day gently gives itself back to the evening, when the body grows heavy and the world becomes quiet once more, you do not need to struggle against your thoughts or wrestle with the changing nature of life. You can simply rest. You can allow the breath to come and go like the peaceful stream. You can allow the heart to soften like the maple leaf returning to the earth. You can allow the silence to hold everything you no longer need to carry. Tonight, nothing asks you to become someone different. Nothing asks you to earn peace. Simply let this moment be enough. Let this breath be enough. Let this quiet awareness be enough. And as sleep gently finds its way to you, may everything that no longer belongs to this moment drift away with gratitude, while the stillness that has patiently waited within you all along remains, quiet, steady, and endlessly at peace.